Sunnie has immense knowledge and skills herself. And so, as I mentioned, she has been a certified Montessori teacher for the infant and toddler room. And she has been the head for 6 years in the toddler program at Little Miners. She's developed a powerful knowledge base of the period from birth to age 3, when a child's brain develops more rapidly and more learning takes place than any other stage of development. Now, that statement to me just kind of just like, you know, if you think about how important this time really is and how engaging that it can be. And there's obviously no right or wrong way to do it, but having the skills to understand and evaluate your child and just kind of figure out how you might be able to adopt some of these techniques and principles for your house during this time of COVID and being home with your kids, we thought was really applicable right now. She also recognizes the importance of these formative years. Sunnie is eager to share her insight on how parents can approach the stage mindfully, gain tools for communication, and create new connections. And her goal is to share ideas that create peaceful, supportive, and safe environments for our youngest children. In these spaces, a child's natural passion for wonder, curiosity, exploration, and discovery comes alive. And I can validate that, especially through Sunnie's teachings. So without further ado, again, please use the chat function if you'd like to offer any questions. Sunnie's going to speak, and then at the end, we'll be doing a Q&A. But without further ado, Sunnie, take it away.
Thank you, guys, and thank you so much to the Hive family for asking me to be here. It's such an honor. In the past decade of working with children and parents, the notion that it takes a village to raise a child has been heavily impressed upon me. As Kathy Buchanowski shared in her speech, I think Park City has needed the support system that Hive provides for a long time, and I'm so grateful for these ladies for creating an inviting platform that really nurtures parents on this journey. I wanted to start by giving you guys a little background information on myself, and then I'd like to go over what Montessori is, why it's so impactful, and give you guys parenting strategies, and then finish with how to optimize your home for learning. So my name's Sunnie Elliot. Like Joanna said, I've been the head of the toddler program at Little Miners for 6 years now. And I've had the privilege of having both of Joanna's kids in my class, watching her journey into motherhood and being part of her tribe has been pure magic for me. I vividly remember Joanna and her husband first start talking about adoption after they had their son Caleb, and I got to watch that dream come into fruition. And now their daughter Lucia is a part of my life, and she just breathes so much love and awe and wonder in our community. So I'm just feeling extremely blessed for that. So I've been passionate about babies and young children since I was a little girl. My mother loves to tell the story of how when I was 4 years old, I would go into my brother's crib at night when he cried and rock him to sleep. And I'd already be there with him in my arms by the time she woke up. So that, I think, has just been a lifelong, place of wonder for me. Fast forward to my 30s, and I'm still reveling in the awe and wonder that children surround me with. I began babysitting in middle school, nannied in high school, and after college, destiny brought me to Little Miners. My time there, I feel, revolutionized the way I look at childcare and gave me a platform to support parents on a much deeper level. And the reason I bring this transition up between being just a nanny and a babysitter and moving into going through a Montessori training is I really feel that Montessori education has been the most powerful tool to help build a strong foundation for children. We aim as parents and educators to raise children who will stride into the world with confidence and clarity. We want to create peaceful, supportive, and safe environments. In these places, wonder, curiosity, exploration, and discovery come alive. And I feel like this is just what the Montessori method provides. And definitely now, more than ever, the Montessori philosophy should be a standard for how we approach childcare. So I wanted to share with you all a little bit about Maria Montessori, and she has what I think should be considered a revolutionary book called The Absorbent Mind. So the first chapter in it talks about the child's part in world reconstruction. So she says, today, while the world is in conflict and many plans are afoot for its future reconstruction, education is widely regarded as one of the best means for bringing this about. For no one disputes that mankind, from the mental point of view, is far below the level that civilization claims to have reached. Noble ideas and high standards we've always had, they form a great part of what we teach. Yet warfare and strife show no signs of abating. And if education is always conceived along the same antiquated lines of mere transmission of knowledge, there is little to be hoped for in the form of bettering man's future. For what is the use of transmitting knowledge if the individual's total development lags behind? Instead, we must take into account a psychic entity, a social personality, and a new world force. If help and salvation are to come, they can only come from children. For children are the makers of men. The child is endowed with unknown powers, which can guide us to a more radiant future. So I want to pause there because for me, reading that, I think just sparks enormous hope in just with everything going on in the world, as far as where we have the potential to make that kind of change. She continues by saying, if what we really want is a new world, then education must take as its aim the development of these hidden possibilities. So for me, it's incredible. The Absorbent Mind was published in 1949, and Maria Montessori's timeless views are just as relevant now as they were then. I remember going through my Montessori training with my soul just on fire for the potential of what our world would look like if Montessori method were a cornerstone for raising children. So this is what I want to share with you all today. Whether you've never heard of it, you have brief knowledge, or feel informed, I strongly encourage you to educate yourself and use the Montessori method to elevate your parenting and approach your children in a way that nurtures every aspect of their development. With that being said, I'd like to give you a synopsis of what Montessori is and why it's so powerful. Okay, so Montessori was developed by Dr. Maria Montessori, an Italian physician, educator, and innovator. It's a child-centered educational approach based on nurturing and cultivating a child's natural desire to learn. Dr. Montessori was first and foremost a scientist. She spent over 50 years observing children and creating her child development theory. Her method has proved to be timeless and effective worldwide. With a focus on individual development, all aspects of the child are taken into consideration. This means socially, emotionally, cognitively, and physically. So we're really allowing for the whole personality to take shape and not just the intellect. As a teacher, I've been blown away watching this theory in action. From what I've observed, when adults approach children with a Montessori mindset, the response is tremendous. Which leads me into my next point, that to bring about the change we want to see in the world, Montessori education needs to begin at birth. Dr. Montessori stated that the greatness of the human personality begins at the hour of birth. And I felt like that was an incredibly powerful statement. So for all the new mommies out there and ladies who are pregnant, I have yet to find any resources that have been so empowering as far as how to approach the transition into motherhood, and definitely how to really child, just every single aspect of their development. So whatever stage you are at in the parenting journey, seeking out what Montessori looks like for you as an adult and for your child, I think will undoubtedly be one of the most useful tools. So I've shed light on what Montessori is and its effectiveness. I'd like to move forward giving you some parenting strategies and ideas for how to optimize learning at home. I want to start by saying that Montessori-related resources have been one of the most effective tools we have as teachers. Applying this knowledge in the classroom and watching the response in terms of the child's growth is phenomenal. I provided Joanna with a list of resources to share with you guys, so that's something you can go back on. There's all those books are books that I've personally read, and I cannot attest to how much it's changed our ability to have a classroom. We have a classroom of 15 toddlers, so anybody with toddlers can, I think, relate to what that can feel like sometimes, and just the act of coordinating that many small children is a small feat in itself, and I could not do it without what I've learned from these books. So I hope you can reference this and use it as a stepping stone in your parenting. I'm so happy to be able to share those with you. It brings me immense joy to think about the empowerment you guys will find in those pages. My thoughts on that are also that in 2020, there is an overwhelming amount of information for parents to filter through, and every opinion under the sun on how to raise children. So I strongly encourage you as parents to lean towards child development and Montessori-based books and information. These resources are deeply rooted in how a child's brain and psychic entities work. So next, in order to optimize at-home learning, especially as we navigate the current state of affairs in the world, I want to encourage you to use the Montessori method as a base for how your home is structured. There's a wealth of information between books and the internet on how to set up home environments. Pinterest, I think, has been a godsend for us as teachers. When we are setting up the classroom and finding activities, it's something we often reference. And I think as a parent, while your child is at home right now, having that as kind of a library of things to go to is incredibly helpful. So if you do use Pinterest, what I would recommend is using keywords. So use Montessori as a key search word. Even when you decide to search anything on the internet, if you use Montessori as a base word, and then you can kind of cater it to what age your child is or what you're looking for. So for example, if I had a brand new infant at home, I would go into Pinterest and search Montessori infant home environment. And you'll get so many great ideas of what those materials look like, what an infant room that's structured in a Montessori way looks like, and then everything under the sun as far as helpful articles and even ways to link to blogs and other Montessori-based communities. So if you don't have Pinterest yet, do that, and if you have not used that as a resource yet, please go and check it out, because I think it's a great tool for mommies. So from birth through high school, incorporating the Montessori philosophy into your home and environment, I think, sets the stage for a fundamentally sound foundation. And I think my key point here would be that probably the most helpful way to optimize learning in your house is to use the idea of the prepared environment. So this is Maria Montessori's concept that the environment can be designed to facilitate maximum independent learning and exploration of the child. A prepared environment gives every child the freedom to fully develop their unique potential through developmentally appropriate sensorial materials. I won't go too much further into this because I feel like there's so much amazing information out there on how to set up a home environment, and it's very specific to the age group you have. But so please do your research and see what that looks like for whatever age child you have. Montessori materials, furniture, and toys are crafted with beauty and have the same effect on children as nature does. One of my good friends just started a company out of Boise that makes absolutely beautiful materials. If you have kids under the age of 3, definitely check them out. The company is called Love Very, and I highly recommend their play kits for anyone with kids from 0 to 3. They have the most amazing wood material, and everything is so in tune with exactly where your child's brain is developmentally. So yes, the company is called Love Very, and they're probably one of my favorite Montessori tool, like for providing tools if you have kids under the age of 3. So I wanted to pause and show you a few examples of what these materials would look like to incorporate in your home. And I also want to challenge you to seek out toys that encourage open-ended play, critical thinking, and creativity. So for parents who have small babies, something that was taught to us in our training is that we want to kind of think outside the box as far as what kind of toys we're providing our babies. And a really great place to start is to think of kind of open-ended play. A lot of toys these days are plastic and they kind of only have one function. So I think everyone can think of what that looks like in their head. It's plastic and colorful, and you push one button and that's the only effect it has. Versus if a baby is put outside on a blanket and you give them a silver bowl like this, what that does for that baby is that baby all of a sudden is turning their gears in their brain and thinking all kinds of things. They might be noticing the reflection from the sun and how it shines. They could be noticing the temperature of the bowl. So the sensory input for that baby is so much greater than just your average toy that only has one input. Babies can make noise with a bowl. They can put things inside of it. And so you can see easily just with that, that it's an extremely simple thing, but that the possibilities for a baby's brain are kind of endless as far as what they can interpret that. So yeah, definitely with infants and small children, seek out what that looks like, what open-ended play looks like, and what kind of materials are going to create that kind of critical thinking in your baby. Another wonderful thing that we found, I think, regardless of age group, it can go from small babies up to much older children. And I think it's been probably the thing that keeps our kids the busiest in the classroom, which is so nice for us when you have that many kids going around to have, I think we have 2 or 3 kids who are always focused on the sensory bins. Pinterest is a great place to find ideas for these sensory bins, regardless of age group. I put one together that's just kind of a example. So I'll kind of point down for you guys to see. So in there I have just different elements of nature. I put rocks in there, sticks in there. I have this bear that's made out of stone, and right away from picking it up, I'm noticing things like texture. I'm noticing that it's extremely smooth, that it's cold. I have sticks in here, different little elements, something that's shiny. So that's a absolutely wonderful tool, I think, to incorporate in the home. Summertime is such a fun way to extend that to outside learning. Water tables, we've done things where you just have different kitchen utensils. You can fill up a big bin with water and just throw in lots of different kitchen utensils. They can stir, they can scoop, and it just provides, I think, sometimes up to hours of open-ended play. I also wanted to share with you just what the effect that I think Montessori materials have. And when you bring those things into your home and I think are able to kind of gear the toys that your children have at home to be Montessori, I think you can see really clearly. So almost everything in our classrooms is made out of wood. We try and avoid plastic as much as we can. I think it has, very much the same effect as if you're outside in nature. It feels calm and kind of uncluttered, and I think is really pleasing to the eye. So if the idea is to kind of encourage learning, I don't think there's any better way to do that than having really beautiful, inviting material. So in the home environment, I think the more things that can be geared towards wood and nature and plants and things like that, that really allows, I think, an optimal learning environment for children. When you move up to older ages, you'll see that everything that we do in Montessori, you can touch with your hands. And so if our hands are the sensory input to our brains, you can see how powerful that is for a child, that when they're doing a math problem, they're not just seeing numbers, they're physically holding that. So as they get into older ages, you'll see, I have one bead here, and I can really grasp the concept of what that looks like. And that goes up into blocks of 20, and then what a block of 100 looks like. So for me, that concept of being able to use hands-on material to optimize learning, I think, is incredibly powerful. This is another thing I want to show you. It happens to be one of our favorite things in the toddler room. It's a nesting doll, and it's a great way for people like toddlers to start to do size discrimination and start to set the fundamentals to move up into math and other things. So these are great to incorporate into the home. I also wanted to show you, we have knobbed cylinders. You can see this is really light colored, beautiful wood. The children in the classroom have endless ways of using this, even for their fine motor control, just the precursors to writing. They're able to grasp that with their finger and see the different sizes and widths. So these are really great examples of what Montessori materials look like. And if you kind of do some research and figure out, I think the more you can have these things in your home, the more you're going to be able to connect with your children, and your children are going to be able to stay busy and focused and be thinking critically. So to conclude, Dr. Montessori ends the first chapter of The Absorbent Mind by saying, "Therefore, I hold that any reform of education must be based on the personality of man. Man himself must become the center of education, and we must never forget that man does not develop only at university, but begins his mental growth at birth and pursues it with the greatest intensity during the first 3 years of life." So the idea that children form, I think, close to 75% of the brain connections they'll ever make before the age of 6 is such a powerful place to kind of put our attention. And I think trying to implement Montessori ideas and philosophies into our home just greatly aids us in, I think, children being on that path. To this period, more than any other, it's imperative to give active care. If we follow these rules, the child, instead of being a burden, shows himself to us as the greatest and most consoling of nature's wonders. Montessori helps us to witness the development of the human soul, the emergence of the new man, who will no longer be the victim of events, but thanks to his clarity of vision, will be able to direct and to mold the future of mankind. So for me, these concepts, I think, hold so much hope for the future. I really hope that you all get to experience the magic of Montessori and use it as a stepping stone in your parenting. Thank you all so much for being here and sharing this space with me. And thank you again to Hive for providing this network for parents to connect and learn. I would love to hear any questions, and if there aren't any, Joanna, if there's any other things or questions you have that I think can open up helpful ideas for parents, I'd love to dive into that.
Thank you so much, Sunny. Really informative, and I would love for anybody to also chat in about the ages of their kids, so we can have some insight into that in terms of who's listening and how we can kind of gear the answers of our questions to those ages specifically. One thing I want to know about is that, so you talk a lot, I mean, obviously with the Montessori method, you're trying to incorporate different senses through learning, right? Like you're talking about the tactile senses and visual senses and things of that sort. And everyone, I'm more familiar with adult development in terms of people learn differently. I just wanted to get your perspective. If you have a child who's really engaged and really focuses on one thing, do you feel like it's important to try to balance them out? Like for a child who's not super interested in art, do you try to get them interested in art, or do you just follow the path of what they're really interested in?
Yeah, so I think especially for the age group of 0 to 3, we definitely follow that model of, I mean, one of the, I think, cornerstones is follow the child. And so I think as children get older, and definitely in the lower elementary classrooms, the goal of the teacher is to kind of incorporate a little bit of everything and make sure that you're getting exposed to a little bit of everything. But the basis of it is that we really want to follow what the child is doing and observe what they're doing. And for our age group from 0 to 3, when a child is interested in something, we do everything we can to not interrupt that. And I think there's this idea that children are that we need to kind of fill them with our wisdom. And I think the most powerful thing I've seen is reversing that philosophy that the child has this kind of wisdom and seeing the world that we can't possibly have. You know, they're in an unconscious state of mind. They're so highly absorbent, and I think they're able to see connections that our adult brains don't see. So in our training, we were highly encouraged to really let children seek and pick works that are interested. And I think that's amazing as a parent or an educator, because you get to very clearly see what that child's brain is excited about and also what they're trying to learn in that moment. And it's pretty amazing, I think, to see even in a group of 10 children. One year, for example, we had a little girl who was 2. She only had one other sister, but she was completely blown away by trains and anything that had like motors and moved. So my job as a teacher was, what can I provide in the classroom that really sparks that in her? So I would look for what kind of train books I can find. Like, I'm going to find activities where she can build a train track. I'm going to have a diagram that shows her all the different parts of the train. So to answer that, I think if a child is focused on something, the most nurturing thing we can do in that moment is give them that chance to really seek out that one activity. And yeah, we try as little as we can to kind of sway them in a direction that we think. And that goes even, I think, into things like discipline. In our training, I think as adults, it's really easy when kids get into interactions, you want to kind of step in, and you feel like it's your job as an adult to step in. And we were taught to kind of stay back and observe. And it's so cool to see that even in toddlers, because 2-year-olds will be, trying to do the same activity at once. And you kind of are like, oh, I need to step in and do something. But what we want to do is kind of empower them to figure those things out by themselves. So as teachers, we're taught to step back and put our bodies there in case there's any sort of safety issue, but to watch it unfold. And it's pretty amazing how more often than not, the interaction goes in a way that you didn't think it would, or you think a child's going to hit and they end up just handing it over. And so, yeah, I think being able to let that child, and that's where the prepared environment, I think that's probably one of my biggest points, is how you prepare your environment and what is in your child's environment is everything. Children, we obviously want our children to learn through what we say, but children learn best through doing and through experiences. So I think that's a really a powerful place for that.
Great. And that actually leads into a question that Rachel submitted, and she wants to know about, can you talk about how to incorporate music and songs and sound purposefully? So within that environment, they talk about kind of crafting and creating and curating for your kids. How do you incorporate those types of sensorial inputs and interactions?
So I think a great way, do you know how old is is she a little girl?
Rachel did not say. I know Liza has a 12-month-old baby girl.
Oh, okay. I think I saw that pop up in the screen.
Rachel, if you want to tell us, we can, she said 10 months.
10 months. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think a really beautiful way to do that, and Pinterest would be a great visual reference. I think having an area in your home that has low Montessori shelves that are accessible to the child, and having a corner that's specifically dedicated to music, and that can have activities, I think, that can be separated into either little bowls or little trays, and kind of provide a little bit of variety as far as those things. You can have a little ukulele, a little xylophone, and different elements as far as that. And I think it's really cool if you can put in, maybe 5 to 10 different things and see what the baby gravitates towards, but just giving it, a variety of things, and having it just be there, and that being an open-ended play, I think, is a really, really wonderful way to expose that. We had a teacher do music with us, Miss Camille, and the listening and attention that came from that, I think, completely blew us away. It was probably the only time where we had all 15 toddlers silent and listening, sometimes for 20 minutes straight. So I think any opportunity to have live music, if you have anyone that plays instruments and things like that, obviously it's a tiny bit more challenging right now. I don't know if there's a really, really awesome lady that does music class at the library. Those kinds of classes, I think, are so powerful for babies. So unfortunately, if those things aren't being provided right now, I don't think it's trying to do that over the internet or things like that is definitely much harder for young children.
I will say that I did see Miss Katrina out on the library lawn doing a story time last week. So some of that is going on. They're doing it outside. Everybody's masked, but they are continuing with some of that. I'm not sure about music time, but I'm sure she's.
So I would say even with a 10 or 12-month-old, like if you can have exposure to that, I don't think they're ever too young. And it's something that's been impressed upon me is just how much, like, we don't give babies, even young children, enough credit. Like, they understand so much more than they show, and they're so incredibly receptive and absorbent. And so being able to expose, even have a 10-month-old at a story time or something like that is, I think, a really, really great thing to do.
Great. We're going to kind of transition from there, talking about extended play a little bit from what you mentioned. And Perry, this is something that I was thinking about too. I love it. So suggestions for extending play, because a lot of parents are home during COVID and a lot of people are trying to work. So she said her child plays with toys, water tables, and other sensory things for a short time, and she feels like she's constantly coming up with new things to do all day long. So any strategies, that's kind of part one. I'm going to do a part two because I feel like you can kind of marry these. Because Liza chimed in a little bit and was asking about, she sees a lot of Montessori setups with just a few toys out at a time. And how do you do that and still keep interest? Do you do different setups at different areas of the home? What would you suggest?
Okay, so my thoughts on that are that is a little bit dependent on the age group. And so I think the really tricky thing for parents who have children under the age of 3, especially, is that just by nature, their attention span is a little bit shorter. So they're not going to focus on things for as long. And so that's very natural that, you have 10 activities and they might plow through them in 2 minutes. And for us as teachers, a huge part of our job was being able to set up the environment in a way that, you know, we're finding the things that really, really catch their attention.
Hang on tight, everyone. I want to see if I can get her back. Hold on one second. She's coming back. Here we go.
Can you hear me?
Okay, yes.
Oh, I am so sorry. The dog came through and tore my cord out of the wall.
Okay, we can't see you, but we can hear you. You want to start your video?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
perfect.
I'm back. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so tie back in. So Perry was asking about her young children, and in her environment, she's feeling like they're kind of quickly moving from activity to activity. And yes, so that I think correlates definitely with the age. The older they get, the longer they're going to be able to stay with things. One tool I think would be to really observe. I think a huge part of how we set up our classroom is being able to kind of sit back and observe and have periods of time, even maybe writing it down, where you're kind of taking note of like, oh, they happen to really, they played with that for quite a bit longer than another activity, or that seemed to really spark their attention, and move your inspiration as far as what you put in your house and kind of the materials that you're putting out based on what you're seeing. So that's kind of what I was saying with the little girl who loved the trains. It's how much can you put out that's kind of catered to what they're at, because sometimes they only have one specific goal in mind. So an example of that would be a lot of toddlers are just in a sensitive period for dumping. So you have something and they want to just take it off the shelf and then like go through the process of putting it back. So, you know, that would be an invitation to like, what can I provide as far as dumping activities, or, you know, the same thing with music. They happen to really like that sound. So what can I put out that encourages those things? And I just am with you guys because I think parents, toddler parents right now are just really, really getting probably worked the most. So yeah, it's kind of a tricky thing, I think, for mommies in that age group. They're not going to sit for very long, but it will get better.
If I could just add something a little personal that we've noticed for us that it's helped, and granted we are not the best, especially if you saw all of our bookshelves right now, but when we take time to declutter it and put out specific things, then the kids tend to play more with them. They get overwhelmed if it's too cluttered and they don't engage. Yeah. So a lot of times we'll put out less, they go and they play, and then the toys we took away, like we do a rotation where we put everything from the garage or our attic back out and we remove everything. And if only we had that motivation consistently, I think that our life would be a lot easier. But that's one aspect that has helped for us. for sure.
Yeah, no, and I'm so glad you share that. And I think it's why the Montessori classroom is effective. When you walk into a Montessori classroom, you can see it's extremely beautifully set up for the children. Every shelf is set up that one activity is on a tray, and this helps the child really see borders and boundaries and kind of see one activity at a time. So for Perry, another thing that might be fun to incorporate, and it's something we use a lot in the toddler room, and I think also ends up being an activity that they really focus on. So we have mats, they're called work mats. And another fun thing to do with your kids is at school, the activities they use are called works. And it's wonderful because kids see their parents going to work and working, and I think it puts, rather than calling it a toy or something like that, if the idea is to learn and to optimize learning, when you're calling it a work, I think you're putting a level of importance there, and that child feels that, and it's beautiful to see in the classroom. They will go around and being like, oh, this is my work, or that's your work, or I'm not done with my work yet. So having a mat and kind of letting your child know that that's how play will be structured, that when you do an activity, that you're going to do it on a mat. So our toddlers will get their mat and roll it flat, and when they're done with their activity, roll it back up. And so just that in itself, the hand-eye coordination and the fine motor grasp of being able to roll up the mat is such a beautiful thing for them to learn. And when they have their activity, if you can encourage them to put one activity at a time on the mat, it really helps them focus on that one activity at a time versus kind of being distracted by all the toys around them. So yeah, and I love what Joanna said as far as filtering toys out, because I think it's incredibly overwhelming for kids when they just have giant toy chests and there's so many toys around. I think minimizing them and having them be specific to like what you've seen your child be interested in definitely encourages that concentration.
I'd love to switch gears for 1 second. You talked about this briefly because we've been focusing mostly on the environment and learning strategies. I would love to get your your perspective as a teacher from your experience, but also kind of the Montessori perspective, which the two are obviously going to be blended. But in terms of addressing certain behaviors, right? Because as soon as you get used to one stage and you're like, okay, we're on to this independent stage, and they go to another stage, they're constantly like, you have to adapt with your kids. And so I'm interested to hear kind of some of the strategies or the framework that Montessori puts forth in terms of how to promote, how do you deal with a child who's behaving in a difficult way, if I can put it in a light way.
Yeah, so I think for us, the books on that, I think, have been instrumental in trying to approach that. And I think maybe the hardest thing is that we as adults it's so hard for us to understand what that feels like for that 2-year-old. And a lot of times their emotions and things can be a little confusing to us. So I think probably the base of that would be really understanding what's happening developmentally, and kind of researching that and kind of what those growth spurts look like, so that when you see that behavior, you can kind of meet them where they're at. And I think definitely empathizing with what the child is feeling, and like definitely lots of books on emotions and things like that. But yeah, I would say being aware of what happens at each developmental stage, so that when you're seeing that behavior, you can understand why it's happening. And I think when we do that and we educate ourselves, the child feels so much more seen and heard, and the response there is really powerful.
So are there ways that we contribute to those behavior problems? Like, are there common ways that we overestimate what our kids can do? Because I know there are ways that we obviously underestimate, but kind of where are the kind of adult faults, if you will, in terms of either end of the spectrum? Like, where do you feel like we underestimate what our kids can do and overestimate? And obviously it's somewhat age dependent.
Yeah, so I think behavioral stuff for children, our kind of philosophy is that you can't try and fix something before you build it. You're not going to try and fix a car before you build it. And I think it's really easy to feel like, even with a 2 or 3 year old, that, because they've done it right, or they've shown you, that you feel like that they know better, or that they shouldn't be doing that because it's been a repeated thing and that you've asked them so many times to not do that. So I think not falling into that idea that discipline at that age needs to look like any sort of fixing. Like, I think it all needs to come from a place of showing, and that you're still building that foundation. They told us in our training, get ready to say it a million times, and just with just as much patience the first time as the millionth time, because that's what the first 3 years of life are. It's just repetition and doing the same thing over and over again. And I think definitely keeping our instruction and what we need children to do really short. I think there's so much going on in their brains. So instead of giving them a long explanation, just giving them small tasks like shoes on, close the door, simple things like that, I think really, really help them. And I think having for so many kids that age, they haven't had enough repetition to really do the things you want them to do. So like, we want them to not hit, but the reality is they're constantly trying to find that boundary. So they need to know what hitting looks like in a lot of different scenarios. And so what they're looking for is a similar response every time. They want to know that if they hit somebody in front of their mom, they're going to get the same response as if they hit somebody in front of their teacher. And so I think being patient with them through that process is really important.
So with your experience, are there ways that your perception has changed from when you started teaching to now about kids and interacting with them?
Yeah, Montessori has just completely changed the way I approach kids and what they're capable of. So a great example of that is when I started working at Little Miners. I was working in early childhood, 3 to 6, and we'd get ready for recess, and I'm sitting there putting shoes on all the 3-year-olds, because in my brain, you help a 3-year-old put shoes on. And the teachers quickly corrected me and said, no, the 3-year-olds put their own shoes on, and things like that. So it's gotten me to think very critically, as far as even, I think, from young babies and infants, what can we do as adults that kind of starts to put that voice in their head of like, I'm capable and I can do this. So for young toddlers, everything we can as far as like fostering independence, we are trying to help them learn how to put their own shoes on and get dressed. And so I think having a proper idea of what that looks like. So for us, putting shoes on in a toddler room at the beginning of the year, it's a lot of like, you're helping them put the back on, you're helping them put the straps on. And we try and do as little as we can and let them do as much as they can. So if at the beginning that means, they're just, pinch and pull the straps, we really encourage them to do that. And I think being able to kind of zoom out and see that all these things take so much time and repetition. So for how we structure the classroom, we're trying to get them to put their things in their cubbies and put their coats on and things like that. And that is such a long process. Like, that's something that we work on from August, until the end of the year. And it's so, so cool to see as a teacher that progression, and that you don't ever give up or, feel like you're not making progress. Because sometimes you're like, I've been asking them to put their works away for like 6 months. And then all of a sudden things come full circle. So I think having that time frame, that kids just need an enormous amount of repetition. And I think through observation, you can really start to kind of find that middle ground where it's like, I'm here, you're going to do it as much as you can by yourself, and I'm going to meet you halfway. And slowly that starts to go from, them just being able to pull the Velcro on their shoes to, by the end of the year, they're putting their own shoes on.
but it's just, they need that, I think, consistency and repetition. And I think that patience, that we understand that like those things take a very long time. And even as adults, I think instilling new habits, it just takes a lot of practice. So showing that to our kids and just kind of believing them and showing a lot of empathy, I think creates a lot of response on their part as far as, emotional.
Well, it makes perfect sense. And I feel like repetition is needed for adults too, because even this conversation, I'm like, oh yeah, I need to give space to my kids to enable them to have time. And I think that our roles as adults, so often we look at ourselves as like the fixers, the helpers, because that is our role a lot. But and a lot of times we don't want to see our kids struggling, but that like uncomfortable spot is actually a lot of times where the learning seems to happen, and giving them opportunities to struggle. And granted, a lot of that takes advanced preparation, like, okay, we're going to leave the house 10 minutes early because I know it's going to take us 10 minutes to get into the actual car, which before the time of COVID was a lot of times really, really hard when you're rushing out the door to go get your kids to school, to go to work, to pick them up. So, but I do think that, having those discussions where we as adults are reminded and get that repetition of, we need to be flexible in our roles of, yes, the fixers, yes, the helpers, yes, the consolers, but also enabling our kids to struggle, right?
Yeah.
So we're getting towards the end of the hour. I did want to finish with a question, kind of flipping the roles here a little bit, but especially in this time of COVID, we know that not only are parents struggling, but it has been a huge task for teachers to provide online learning and adapt to the new constraints. And so I just wanted to finish with a question about, how do you feel like we as parents can help support teachers and educators and, people in our support system, obviously, who contribute to the learning during this time of COVID, whether it's through communication or tangible aspects or, things of that sort. Like, how can we help people in your roles?
So I think the more educated people are, and I think the more people take the time to really sit, that list of resources I gave, I think it just creates a uniform way of thinking in our community. I think it creates a uniform approach to our kids. And I just know as a teacher that the way what we're trying to instill in those kids, when parents have taken the time to educate themselves on that, I think just that platform and that ability to kind of create change and like to educate our kids is so powerful. And I think that's why, my big point would be to go through that list. And even if it's really slow, I know it's so hard for mommies to find time to read, or if you have a new baby, but do those things. I think you will better understand your teachers. I think you will better understand yourself. And I think it just creates a really powerful system for, kids to learn and be a part of that.
Thank you, Sunnie. We so appreciate you and everything you've done, and especially for my family, for everything you've given to us. But
yeah,
passion insights have been so palpable the whole time. And I can assure you, Sunnie continues to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow in terms of her skills and her tools that she's able to, and just being able to communicate with these little beings. She just, I think that there's an understanding of how their brain works, and it really enables a true communication, right? And so she's kind of like our translator, our toddler translator.
And I think with that, I would just say that I can try my best to communicate that. I'm also not the best public speaker, but my heart is there. But I think it's the same thing as with the children. We can try and relay these ideas, but I don't think there's anything more powerful than educating yourself. And that would be kind of my underlying point, is the wealth of information as far as Montessori and how to set up your home environment, everything under the sun, how to discipline your kids, how to how to make them aware of things like, cosmic things, how to nurture their spirit. There's so much, I think, with religion these days, but sometimes we forget that aside from religion, we have like spirituality in these things. So these books and these resources are just everything as far as, I think, moving forward in a positive way. And I think dealing with COVID, it's just the one thing I have found to be extremely impactful. So yeah, I think that would be my takeaway is do your research, like whatever level of Montessori you're at, and constantly re-educate yourself. It's something, I mean, I'm going back and rereading all the books. I read The Absorbent Mind for training, and I'm rereading it now. And just the awe and wonder of like reading that and being kind of like, this is the vision I want for my kids. This is the vision I want for my community. And so, yeah, it just makes me so happy to know that that is something, you guys have access to. And I think if you use Montessori as kind of a base, you really can't go wrong. It's so deeply rooted in the development of children. And at any stage that they're at, you can just search what kids are going through developmentally. And I think understanding that, knowing that it's totally normal for a 2-year-old to hit, it's totally, normal for a 3-year-old to question why. And so I think those things and educating yourself is really, really the most important thing we can do right now.
Fantastic. And as you mentioned earlier, we do have that resource list. So we will be emailing that out. So if you are not connected with Hive, make sure to email us at hivefamilycollective@gmail.com, and we will be getting that out. We also have recorded this, as I mentioned this in the beginning. We will put a link up on our website so you're able to view this or review it at any time that you want. And we just thank you for joining us. We will be taking a speaker series break next month for August, since kind of, last hurrah for summer. And I know a lot of people will be camping and things of that sort. So we will resume during the school year, however that looks for us, in September. And if you have any topics that you are interested in us highlighting, please let us know. We would love to, we want to curate it for this community. So thank you to Sunnie Elliot. Thank you to everybody who's been here.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Yes, and this was for all the babies out there. Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye, everybody.